Oh, I'm double muted. I'm here.
Great. Terrific. Our agenda this evening, we have one change. We did have a resolution on the hold list that we were going to vote on tonight, but given the many, many things that are happening, in addition to submitting a letter to the Maryland State Healthcare Commission regarding urgent care at WA and a number of other things, we're going to actually do that as a work session tonight, a quick work session to make sure that staff have all the questions that we have on that item, and we'll move it to a voting item for next week. So that's the change for this evening. Looking at our council meetings moving ahead, next week, we have a presentation of the Complete Safe Streets Committee, recommendations on traffic calming and sidewalks. Our voting session next week will be the first reading ordinance approving traffic calming for the 8,000 block of Wildwood Drive, as well as the first reading ordinance approving traffic calming for Darwin Avenue. We will have the resolution regarding budget hold items, a resolution regarding tax duplication, and our work session will be on the continuation of talking about the stormwater management fee system and draft amendment to the city code. And tentatively, we'll have the work session on code enforcement. Then on March 17th, we'll have a proclamation for Meet Out Day. Our voting session will include the second reading ordinances for traffic calming on the 8,000 block of Wildwood and traffic calming on Darwin Avenue. And we'll have the first reading ordinance amending the stormwater management code. Our work sessions that evening will be the police department annual report and a continued discussion of committees. It will focus on purpose and charges of committees. And then on Wednesday, March 24th, we'll have a briefing on the minor master plan process and memorandum of agreement between the Montgomery County Planning Board and the city of Tacoma Park. This is the area that around Washington Adventist University, the former location of Washington Adventist Hospital, along Maple Avenue up to the community center. Next, we have a voting session, the second reading ordinance amending the stormwater management code. Our two work sessions on the 24th will be a pre-budget briefing on vehicle replacements, technology, recreation department plans, as well as a work session on redistricting and preparing for that. And then we will not have a meeting on Wednesday, March 31st. And so that, I think the other thing I wanted to kick off our meeting with this evening, if our city TV has it all set, I wanted to share with people from last week's ribbon cutting of Feed the Fridge at the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center, so people can get a sense of how that went and what's available.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Mark Bucher. I'm the founder of Feed the Fridge. I'm the co-founder of Medium Rare Restaurants, proud Montgomery County, Maryland businesses and nonprofits. I've got 4 children that have been born and raised in Montgomery County, Maryland. My wife and our kids all live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and I have been honored and touched, and it is a privilege to have worked with and continue to work with the folks at Tacoma Park, Maryland, to have a Feed the Fridge. Yes, please. What needs to be said first as I introduce everybody here, there's a mindset that everybody in Tacoma Park, Maryland has. And the mindset was, let's help, how soon can we help, how quick can you do it? Which is very different than a lot of jurisdictions in the country and even in the area. Tacoma Park, Maryland was one of the first to email us. They were amongst the first to keep following up on us. And then they're among the first to say, let's make this happen now. And it's a credit to your leaders in Tacoma Park. It's a credit to the political environment that's set by the Montgomery County Council and the county executive. Montgomery County is can do and will do, especially at these levels. Today, we're also installing refrigerators, starting to install refrigerators at Montgomery County Public Schools as well. And the call we had with them yesterday was, how quickly can you go? So we are here for the county. Feed the Fridge is not going anywhere, and we're going to make sure we take care of everyone and change the mindset from food insecurity, which is just another way of saying people are hungry, to meal security. The meals are here. Come get them. No lists, no signups, no monitoring. Enjoy meals. Today's meals are Rasica, medium rare, and prescription chicken. And they are restaurant quality meals that we buy from restaurants. I'll tell you more about me later. First and foremost, I want to introduce Mayor Kate. Really work together to make everything happen. I want to welcome up Tacoma Park Councilmember Talisha Searcy. You got it. You know, no one ever gets my last name right, ever. So thank God.
Well, first, I want to thank you, Mark, again. As others have mentioned, food insecurity is an issue that has plagued our residents before COVID, and COVID has only exacerbated that problem. One of the multifamily buildings that's right next door to this site has a number of low to moderate income residents, people who are new to this country, who are perhaps undocumented, who otherwise would be fearful of applying for different programs that are designed to address food insecurity that's available today. This program, Feed the Fridge, eliminates that barrier by providing those residents with the opportunity to obtain a hot meal from a great restaurant, no questions asked, no strings attached. And that, for this community, is so valuable as a sanctuary city. So again, I just want to reiterate our appreciation for what you are doing, not just in the city of Tacoma Park, but throughout the county, because it really does serve a valuable role in our food supply chain in this area. So again, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for showing that, and people can see. We figured we'd just show you the highlights and not everybody's speech, but if you want to see everyone's speech who came out, you can get on. I believe it's on the city website, and it's just as we talked about, and Councilwoman Searcy said, the idea that people can just walk up, no questions asked, get a meal, bring it home to their family is great. And so I just want to do a huge shout out to our deputy city manager, Jessica Clark, because when Mark talked about emailing, doing the arrangements and everything, that's all Jessica. So thank you, Jessica, for doing that. Jessica is also behind, continuing to have our COVID testing at the New Hampshire Rec Center and making sure the county continues with that. And we're also continuing to work with CCI, the Community Health Clinic on New Hampshire Avenue. As we mentioned, they were selected as the first in the state to distribute more vaccines to their clients, and we're helping in the city to facilitate that. And so thank you, Jessica, for all the work you're doing in that area. Now I want to turn it over to Ann for our legislative update. We're halfway through, right, Ann?
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. That's the first thing on my list. We're halfway through. We're a little better than halfway through. We're a couple weeks shy of what is known as crossover, the crossover date, when House bills have to go to the Senate and Senate bills have to be in the House to avoid additional hurdles. So there is a lot of work happening. The big thing in the news, of course, is about what the Senate has done with relation to some of the police reform bills. They have passed out 8 different bills. I think as we've talked about before, compared to nothing, they're all pretty significant. They did not go as far as I think a lot of advocacy groups wanted to see happen. And I think in terms of some of the priorities for the city as well. That's just the Senate. The House is still working on its version. They seem to be doing one omnibus bill, which is going to make everything very interesting. So, but the House is making its changes, and then there'll be a lot, I think, of discussion in conference committees on the bills.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So at the federal level, if two houses pass different versions of something, then there's a conference committee. But remind us how it works at the state level, because it's different.
It's rather similar. So a bill that is the same bill that's different in the House and Senate. One of the chambers can recede and take the other chamber's changes, or they can refuse to recede and they go to a conference committee. The thing that's really interesting about this is you have 8 individual bills over here, and then one omnibus bill over here. And so it's just it'll just be interesting how they reconcile that, and do they pass one bill, 8 bills, or something in between. So but it will all likely be in some kind of giant conference committee. Right as we speak, the House Judiciary Committee started just a few minutes ago debate or the bill hearing on this year's version of the Trust Act related to law enforcement, local law enforcement working or not having to work with federal law enforcement related to immigration. On housing issues, the House has a small work group that is looking at some issues that the House Speaker has stated are priorities for her, including a right to counsel in eviction cases, and doing some other modifications to how the rent court system works. For example, adding notice, which doesn't happen. So there are some things that are moving, and we'll see. It looks like the House is going to move first on those things before the Senate. In the world of the environment, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of voting going on environmental issues. Just about half an hour ago, the Senate Finance Committee passed out a bill that Tacoma Park supported, related to tree replacement along the Purple Line. The House bill has passed. Now the Senate is moving its bill, so that looks promising. Stormwater management bills are moving on both the House and the Senate sides, which is great, a real bipartisan effort. The plastic bag ban bill came out of the House committee, so that's moving forward. There's a comprehensive climate solutions bill that is being really worked on significantly in a positive way, working on addressing a lot of concerns to get it passed. And the Community Choice Energy bill, pilot bill, has passed out of the House committee as well. So there's a whole lot good going on. Unfortunately, today, the Montgomery County Stable Homes Act bill was voted down in a House subcommittee. That bill seems to get into it isn't in the best committee for getting a positive vote on that. So, but there are other good housing things, as I mentioned, that will happen, should happen this session.
Great. Thank you so much for the update. And anyone else have any questions? All right, seeing none then, thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
And now we have our update from our Youth Council. Julia is with us, and we're glad to see you, Julia. And if you want to give us an update on the Youth Council.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Julia Maynard. I'm from Ward 3. This is my first year on Youth Council, and I'm very excited to share kind of some things we've been working on. It's definitely been a challenging year to plan different events, but we have an amazing president, Asha Henry, which I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with, and she's kind of introduced us to lots of different organizations. One of those was Brick and Story, which is spearheading the community outreach for the remodeling of the New Hampshire Avenue Community Center. Some of the things we've been working on since the vaccine process has started, of course, there's been speculations. So we've wanted to kind of spread correct and truthful evidence that it does work. And so we've been making infographics and getting that out. And for people my age, that's mainly through social media. And so that's kind of where we've been putting out most of our information. And then a big topic of conversation lately, especially with kids my age, is the having a student resource officer in schools, also known as the SRO program. And we've submitted our testimony to the county council in support of the removal of the SRO program. We've just seen the evidence behind it. And, lots of people my age have signed different petitions, including myself, and we've created letters. And that's kind of what we've been working on so far. Thank you so much for giving me time to give you this update. And yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Julia. Terrific. Anyone have any questions or anything? Councilman Dabala, sorry, and Councilman Searcy.
Yeah, my question for Julia is, well, actually, my question for the city manager is, can we list the youth council's testimony on the testimony page for?
We should talk about that.
Okay.
We'll find a way to
highlight it somehow. Yes, thank you.
We just have to make sure, because the city council has not taken a position on it. Just want to make sure we do it appropriately, so we can figure that out. Councilman Searcy?
First, thank you so much, Julia, for coming before us today. I appreciate it. I just want to make sure, has the council seen the testimony? I would love to, yes. Is there any way that we can see it?
Yeah, I'll get Asha and she'll figure that out kind of, yeah. But
no, that would be awesome, because, we are definitely working on things like the Public Safety Task Force and things like that. And I think having, this types of information that we're trying to compile for multiple purposes would be really helpful. So if it is possible for us to see that testimony and perhaps use it for even some of the internal city functions, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll get back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Julia. We really appreciate all the work the Youth Council is doing right now. And we know how having, the trials that we have doing our work, how hard it is for you all to meet and everything, and just give our thanks to the whole Youth Council, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
Great. Now we'll move on to public comments. We had Miss Mary Jane Machui, who is with us, signed up for public comments this evening, and so we'll turn it over to Miss Machui. Ms. Carpenter.
Here.
Okay.
Thanks. It wouldn't work in my little oblong here. Thank you, Mayor Stewart. I just wanted to say that I'm concerned about the fate of some of the people with special needs in Tacoma Park. And I'm concerned that my son might end up living in the street at the rate things are going. And I'm really scared. And not people think that all the people with special needs, including severe psychiatric illness, get a lot of help, get a lot of money, and all their parents have money. That's not true. Not all of us are millionaires, and it takes a lot of extra money and patience to have a son, daughter, or other loved one that you're caring for. It's really takes a lot of effort, and it's depressing sometimes. And I'm sorry, I don't like to ask for help, but sometimes I wonder, maybe there should be a committee for us because I have learning disabilities, and maybe there's, I don't know, but if we formed a committee, we'd probably be the only committee no one would want to join. So anyways, thank you all and have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Michui. Now we'll go to council comments. Who wants to go first? So yes, Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I just was thinking today, and about our library staff. I know we're talking about changing library directors now, and yet I don't think maybe people know how busy the library staff has been with the pandemic. They'd say, well, we can't go to the library. They must be just sitting there doing nothing, but it's quite the opposite. They have a lot of work. They're not only trying to continue business in a different way to keep the library running as efficiently as it always has. People can still borrow books. It's easiest to do that through the online on the city website. But librarians, then people can request books. They can look on the library website and select books that they want, or they can just give general classification of what kind of books they want. Like, they want to get some books for their school kids and kind of the types of books that their kids need. And the library staff then goes out and does the search on the shelf that people would normally do themselves. They pick the books out and package them up for people to come pick up the books. And then when the books come back to the library, I was surprised to hear kind of how they did that, that they actually quarantined the books for a few days to make sure that take away any chance of the virus being transmitted between the book borrower and who borrowed it before. There are a lot of things anyways going on and too numerous to mention, but I want to encourage people to continue to use the library, keep our librarians busy as they are. But at the same time they're doing all that, these, some of the staff is also trying to figure out how they're going to keep things organized and in business while we do renovation work and expansion in the library. So anyways, I just, it's what happens when you let me sit at home for a little while. I start thinking about all these things and feel like I have to tell you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. Next we have Councilman Kostick.
Hey everyone, just a quick update. Just wanted to let everyone know, and I know a number of my colleagues are planning on attending as well, that the National League of Cities Conference is coming up starting this weekend and going through the beginning of next week. I had a call today with the Human Development Federal Advocacy Committee staff member at NLC, and I'm one of the vice chairs for that committee, and we had a meeting today, kind of planning ahead for the meeting that we'll have next week. It looks like overall the conference is going to have some really useful sessions, a number of them focused on vaccines and COVID. Dr. Fauci is expected to be there. And during our session, we are going to hear from Virginia Congressman Bobby Scott, who chairs the Education and Labor Committee, focused specifically on discussing workforce development. So I think that will be a really useful discussion, and hopefully there'll be some useful information I can bring back from that meeting. So just wanted to flag that, and if anyone has specific questions or things you're interested in me bringing up or finding out in that discussion, please let me know.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Smith.
I want to thank residents yesterday for attending the Tenant Association meeting at Essex House. I want to thank Matt Losak, Alexandra, and others that are part of the Tenant Association that helped put this great meeting together. I hope that Enterprise understands that the issues that were discussed have been going on for a very long time, And hopefully this is going to be the opportunity that we actually get some resolution. The other thing is I would like to ask staff to contact Beijing Delight Restaurant on Flower Avenue. Just got a report that they're using polystyrene boxes for their food. It'd be great to give them a reminder that those are not supposed to be used in Tacoma Park. Thank you.
Great. Councilwoman Searcy.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I will be attending NLC starting this weekend. So I will be attending that meeting as well. You saw the press conference in terms of Feed the Fridge. Now I just want to encourage everyone to remind their residents that the fridge is there and that people should and can be encouraged to leverage their fridge as a way to access food, particularly for those families with younger children who may need access to food on the fly. So definitely want to encourage everyone to remind your constituents about the fridge so that we can encourage everyone to use it. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Councilwoman DeBala.
Yes, thank you. So I'll also be at NLC, but more specifically, the Environment and Energy Committee of the National League of Cities, which I'm now vice chair of, is going to be hearing from several administration officials on environment from EPA and from the Department of Energy, focusing on two specific issues: water infrastructure, which includes stormwater, and climate change, climate action, and climate resiliency. So I'm pretty excited about that. And any council members or residents who want to hear how that goes, we'll be doing that Sunday afternoon. And then by Monday, I'll be able to make a report. I also sat in on a City Lab conference these last 3 days, focusing on COVID and sustainability. And I was particularly struck today by a panel on transportation and equity and sustainability, and making the point, which I think sometimes we all need to remember in Tacoma Park, that transportation is not just driving, it's all this other stuff. It's metro, it's biking, it's walking, and that many people, car is not their first choice. So just bringing that national message home to the local climate planning. And that is, oh, one more thing. I've had a couple of residents approach me about replicating Feed the Fridge in the neighborhoods, because the Feed the Fridge is specifically designed for restaurants, and we've asked people not to do that. So I would like to talk with the deputy city manager about how that might work before we get too many boxes around town that are not coordinated. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Great. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. Just one thing I wanted to mention connected to the ongoing Montgomery College construction project this month. And I'm not sure of the exact date yet, but it may be coming up in a week or so. There's going to be a road closure, and it will be on Tacoma Avenue, the block between Fenton Street and New York Avenue. And that's because they're connecting to a water pipe there, and it's expected to take about 3 weeks. And so during regular working hours from around 9 to 3 or so, that block will be closed off. Those who live on that block, there's 5 or 6 homes there, will be able to have access to their driveways, but there'll be no through traffic during those hours from 9 to 3. So if you drive up that way, you'll have to basically go around the college. You won't be able to go through Fenton to get to Philadelphia, let's say. That'll be about 3 weeks. And when we know the precise dates, I'll circulate that, but I just wanted to mention that's an upcoming closure. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I have a couple of updates. Last Friday, the deputy city manager, myself, and our emergency preparedness, I forget what Ron's title is, met with the new executive director of the Red Cross for our region. And we learned a great deal about what the Red Cross is doing, and hopefully we'll be able to partner with them on some things. One of the interesting things we learned is that for their blood drives right now, they can do antibody testing. And they have a number of other programs, and one that I actually connected the youth council with and the Red Cross. So it was a terrific meeting. The other thing, last Thursday night, I want to thank our head of public works for a meeting with residents on Poplar, Sycamore, Columbia, and that area, talking about stormwater. I know and flooding, and we've been talking about that a lot, and it just brought home a lot of the conversations we've been having in tandem with looking at the stormwater fee and the need to look at ways that we can help private property owners. So I just want to thank the head of public works for that meeting. In addition, I meet with the Maryland mayors, our Montgomery County mayors. We meet once a month. And our meeting this week was Secretary Slater of the Maryland Department of Transportation joined us. And one of the things he updated us on was the urban tree program that the Maryland Department of Transportation is starting. And it sounds very interesting in terms of some of the work that we're trying to do on tree canopy in the city. And they've been also working with Delegate Charkoudian on the bill that she has, particularly around the Purple Line. But I just wanted to raise that for staff because we may want to connect with Samantha Biddle in Secretary Slater's office to find out more about their urban tree program. And perhaps as we're doing more of our work, since we have so many state highways, as we know, in Tacoma Park, that might be a good connection. On March 16th, I've been asked to be on a panel with aldermen from Shackelford, from City of Frederick, and the town manager from the town of Federalsburg to talk about racial equity at the Sustainable Maryland and Equitable Engagement in Local Government Day on March 16th. So we'll be doing that. And then the final thing I wanted to tell folks is that I've been through the Mayor's Innovation Project on looking at mayors for guaranteed income, and they just released a study today that was done in Stockton, California, where under their former mayor, Mayor Tubbs, they had a project that provided people with $500 per month. It was a group, and then they did a control study to look at outcomes of what happens when you provide people with a guaranteed income. I sent around the Atlantic article to my colleagues. I was able to, on Monday evening, get an early release of it, and it's really striking, not just regarding people's well-being, reduced anxiety, better health outcomes, but also people doubled from the control group their employment opportunities. And so the idea is if you have some guaranteed income, it actually helps people who are underemployed because they're able to seek out employment that better fits their skills. Anyway, I highly recommend reading the article. There's a lot there on guaranteed income. And so I just wanted to share that with my colleagues. And I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you very much. I have a short city manager comments section today. Update on COVID-19 information. As you know, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has come out. It's a 1 dose. One of the things that I think is very interesting about it is that it was tested on the more more contagious variants of COVID-19 and found highly effective. All of the 3 versions of COVID-19 vaccines will keep you out of the hospital. Take the first one you can get. And it does seem like there's a few more openings at some of the testing sites for people. I cannot wait till it gets to a larger audience. And we certainly are trying to work to see that it gets to people who need it. I did get my first vaccine shot last Saturday. I had to go to Baltimore for it, to M&T Bank Stadium, and they ran it very well. I think the thing that was most notable to me was that I had to get a lot of assistance from my son to get there. You know, not everybody's got my son, and so it's really it takes a lot of work. But I think we're getting there, and we need to share the access widespread. Both the Maryland vaccine website and the county website have information and have links and phone numbers. And sometimes the best way to get the information is by the phone numbers. Even though we're trying to promote vaccines, we also need to make sure that people still get tested on a regular basis, because that's the only way we catch if there's trends in our community that we need to address. And so the rec center on Saturdays continues to have the COVID-19 testing. We've updated our COVID-19 dashboard as we do each week, and it really is an interesting thing to look at each week. And our wonderful public administration assistant is doing a wonderful job with new ways of showing information that provide a lot of enlightenment for us and help make the case that we need the vaccinations here in Tacoma Park. March is budget month for city staff. We're completely consumed by this. So we've been trying to be responsive, but I will just say it's hours and hours of work. And I give kudos to my staff for trying to not only do their regular jobs, but prepare a proposed budget for the council consideration. One item that I think I wanted to make sure that was raised, Councilmember Searcy, the Purple Line work is going to affect University Boulevard between New Hampshire Avenue and Riggs Road, closing a lane in each direction. So they're going back to finish that utility work that they never got done before. And so I think we need to be attentive to see if there's going to be effects on our businesses again. And so we'll be kind of keeping our eyes out with the new contractors or whomever, that they do a better job on that. That's all I have. I'm happy to ask and answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Okay,
Thank you.
not seeing any. Terrific. We will now move over to our voting session. We have 4 items, and the first one is kind of bittersweet, I guess. We want to celebrate and honor our former library director, and Ellen Arnold Robbins. But of course, it's because you're leaving, and so that's the bitter part of it. But we do have a resolution, and it's a bit long, but I'd like to provide some highlights of it, because I think it's important, given your long service to the community and all that you've done. I'll start. Whereas Ellen Arnold Robbins retired on March 1st, 2021, after 48 years of working at the Tacoma Park Library, including 38 years as library director. And whereas her tenure as Tacoma Park, Maryland Library Director, the library greatly increased both number of patrons and the circulation of books and other materials. And whereas mirroring the city of Tacoma Park's pride in being a diverse community, Ellen built a library collection filled with books and other materials in which diverse voices are amplified and play an important role. And whereas under her direction, the Tacoma Park, Maryland Library has been a champion of intellectual freedom, including Banned Books Week each year, and also initiating a Banned Books Club for Kids, for which the library won an American Library Association's prestigious John Philip Emroff Award, given for contributions to intellectual freedom. And whereas Ellen led with staff assistance the library's automation, including the switch to computerized catalog, the creation of our library webpage, the introduction of public computers, and the establishment of the library's Computer Learning Center. And whereas over the last 2 decades, the library has become known for having the area's best library collection of graphic novels, I can attest to this because my son is very big into this, for kids and adults, curated by library associate Dave Beerbank under supervision of Ellen. And whereas assistance from then children's librarian Ann Schwartz-Delbert, Ellen oversaw the start of public programs at the library for 2-year-olds when such programs for young children were still a novelty in the library world. Since then, the library has added programs for both babies and 1-year-olds in which the crucial importance of early literacy is spotlighted and modeled for parents and caregivers. And whereas in conjunction with library patrons, Ellen shepherded the reincarnation of the Friends of Tacoma Park Library, now a flourishing organization with deep roots in Tacoma Park community and a mission to illuminate the importance of books and reading. And whereas with help from Andy Sincata, Patty Malin, and Tom Roberts, Ellen aided in the creation of Friends of Tacoma Park, Maryland Library's twice annual fundraising book sales, which have been usually popular with local book lovers and have allowed the library to offer many special programs such as Spanish Circle Time, French Circle Time, and Summer Quest and Winter Quest reading programs. And whereas the Friends of the Maryland Library, highly successful book clubs for adults, spearheaded by Meryl Leffler and continued by Phil Shui and Tim Ron, were promoted by Library Director Ellen, and Ellen supported her staff's national and regional leadership roles, such as children and young adult librarian Karen McPherson's participation in the Caldecott Awards and in writing about children's resources for the Washington Post. And whereas Library Director Ellen played a pioneering role, definitely utilizing the library status as one of the few independent municipal libraries in Maryland to offer unique programs to the Tacoma Park community, including the annual programs led by notable storyteller Candace Wolfe Thomas Eagle Bear, Asash, and the Foggy Bottom Morris Men, the Favorite Poem Evening, and the Tacoma Park Film Festival, as well as one-of-the-kind programs such as the Evening of the Original Dance in the Library, featuring library staff as well as others, choreographed by the Liz Lehrman Dance Exchange. And whereas under the guidance of Ellen, the library joined in a successful partnerships with Politics and Prose in 2013 that has brought numerous programs to the Tacoma Park community featuring illustrious children's authors and illustrators. And whereas when the library building was forced to close on March 13, 2020, because of the pandemic, library staff led by Ellen established the Books to Go curbside book pickup service, through which more than 15,000 books and other materials have been checked out by patrons in the first 8 months of the program. And whereas in the decades she served as director, Ellen truly shaped the Tacoma Park, Maryland Library into the beloved and dynamic community treasure and hub it is today. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Council and of the City of Tacoma Park gratefully acknowledges and extends deep thanks for the unwavering service and commitment of Ellen in her 38 years as director of the Tacoma Park, Maryland Library. Thank you, Ellen, so much for all of your service. And I just want to say personally, like so much, my children grew up in that library from the moment that they were wheeled in there or in the Baby Bjorn enjoying Circle Time, all the way up to, through middle school and elementary school when I wasn't there or their grandmother to pick them up right after school. I always knew they had a safe place with you at the library. And then when my son got older and really got into graphic novels, he found a place in our library and then started writing, the little reviews. And so I can say from firsthand, all of the lives that you have touched through the programs that you have created in our library. There are generations and thousands of children and adults in our community and all over the world who have you to thank for the programs you put in place and the magnificent library you helped us build. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And you'll notice we've got a number of our staff online because we all wanted to say goodbye to Ellen and cheer her on. So just yay.
Bye, Ellen.
Oh, bye.
Congratulations.
Great. If anyone else would like to speak, and then we'll pass and vote on the resolution. Would someone like to move the resolution? Councilmember Siemens will move. I have Councilman DeBala second. And I will ask the city clerk to take the vote.
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala.
Yes, with a hearty thank you.
Councilmember Kostick. Yes, and I want to add that thank you as well.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye, and great job. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye, and thank you so much, Ellen, for all of your work. Thank you.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you so much, Ellen. And I'm sure we will hopefully be still seeing you. And we still have a lot to do on the library. So I'm sure you'll be interested to see as things get underway.
Thank you very much. Again, it's been a real honor.
Thank you. Great. So now we'll move on to our second voting item, resolution adopting council priorities. Last week, we wrapped up the work on the document, the longer document, which is on the website attached to the agenda items right now, but we will put that up on the city website and replace the former items that we had. And last week, we did select for our upcoming fiscal year 5 top goals. The first, the council had decided that given the immediacy and the fact that much of our work is centered around mitigating the impact of COVID-19, that we would put that as our first focus area for this year, followed by hiring and onboarding a new city manager. The third was ensuring that a range of safe, high quality, affordable, and stable housing options are equitably available in neighborhoods throughout the community. The fourth item was our work reviewing and reforming the city's approach to public safety. And then the fifth item was climate change mitigation, specifically working towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. Would someone like to move the resolution? Councilmember Kovar, do I have a second? Councilmember Searcy, any comments or questions? Okay, seeing no hands, I'll ask the clerk to call the vote.
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Great. Thank you, everyone. Our next item is the second reading ordinance approving FY 2021 budget amendment number 4. This is a second reading ordinance. I believe there has been no changes since the
That's
first
correct.
reading. I would ask if someone would like to move the ordinance. Councilman Searcy, Councilmember Siemens second. Any questions or comments on this? Seeing none, will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Our final voting item this evening is single reading ordinance awarding contract for police promotional process. We had the work session on that last week. Would someone like to move the ordinance? Councilmember Siemens, do I have a second? Councilman Searcy, any questions or comments on this? Seeing none, will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Great, that's our voting session for this evening. Now we'll move on to our work sessions. The first, we'll do a discussion of the traffic calming request on Darwin Avenue and the 8,000 block of Wildwood Drive. We had the public hearings on this last week, and I thought I saw our head of public works here.
I think she's still on. There we go.
Yeah. Great. I don't know if you wanted to walk us through anything or if there's anything specific to highlight on this. I think you're on.
Both requests that are currently before you are fairly straightforward. The 8,000 block of Wildwood is a speed hump and potential bump outs. We've proposed that we could mark those in advance and have community feedback on those locations. One of the challenges, the speed bump will fairly much locate itself given the parameters from distance from intersections and proximity to driveways. However, the bump out locations are impacted by parking spots. So we'll basically want to make sure that those locations we've identified don't conflict with parking needs on the block. So Talisha, through your leadership, will mark out some locations if this should pass, and then get community feedback and comments on whether or not that location is sufficient or it needs to be adjusted. Darwin Avenue, I believe the request is straightforward. Speed hump, I think the initial request indicated multiple speed humps. However, based on the length of the block and the city's procedural location recommendations related to speed humps, it would be appropriate to have one speed hump in the middle of the block. And so again, we could mark that location in advance and allow for public comment of the residents on that block before we do the installation. Because these are both fairly straightforward, we anticipate being able to move forward as soon as asphalt construction is able to be done again in the slightly warmer temperatures. Looks like we're well on our way this week. So we'll have our on-call contractor schedule those installations and we can get this moving along in the next month or two.
Great. Thank you so much. Councilmember Kovar, Councilman Searcy, any comments or questions regarding these?
I would if I could.
Mhm.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Braithwaite, for that. I think when it comes to Darwin, there are a couple of features which I think I mentioned when we had the hearing that have created some safety concerns for pedestrians. One, it's a street that, although it's a dead end, a lot of people who aren't from that neighborhood go to because it ends up at the parking area for the dog park and the other parks that are over there. So that's the first thing. And there is a big curve in the middle of it. So some people who, again, aren't from there may not realize that they're about to get to a dead end. In addition, there are no sidewalks on the street, and there are some families with young children who live there, which is an added concern, difficult for pedestrians of any age. And I was struck by, I think there's only about 9 or 10 homes on the street, and I think all but 2 of the residents, one is a long-term, not really living in the area. All of those, almost all of the people came and spoke in favor of this at the hearing. So I think it's a good argument for it. I just had one question for Ms. Braithwaite, if she wouldn't mind. Because of the bend in the road, I guess I was kind of imagining there could be one speed bump on each section of it to really be effective, but maybe you can just explain what you were talking about in terms of how many would be appropriate for a street of that size.
Sure. The roadway itself is between 300 and 350 feet long. Our current policy regulations identify that the distance between speed humps should be 150 to 250 feet and 150 feet from a intersection. So based on those distances, you wouldn't be able to fit more than one speed hump within that block because of the shortness of the block.
So the only thing, maybe you can get back to me later on this, where it would make sense to have that in the spot before you get to the parking area, probably.
Oh yeah, it would be mid.
So
yeah, it would be mid block. Our goal would be, should the resolution pass, to either mark it out with paint on the road or cones, so that residents can comment and say, yeah, they like that, or no, they don't like that, and then we can make adjustments as needed.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councilman Searcy.
Thank you so much, Ms. Braithwaite. I think, the speed bump and the temporary bump outs will be good. I think one of the challenges with the 8,000 block of Wildwood is the weird angle in which cars turn from Carroll Avenue onto Wildwood, which, depending on how fast they're coming off of Carroll to turn on the Wildwood, quite frankly, that's how I ended up with a car in my yard, because they hit that turn a little too fast, and then it's kind of at a weird angle, and then they overcorrect. So either they hit a neighbor's car, which is why everyone parks on one side of the street now, because if you park on the other side of the street, there's a very good chance that you're going to lose a windshield or you're going to get sideswiped. So, you know, if there is a way when we're kind of thinking through the options to be able to take that weird angle into consideration, I think that'll be great. Also, the access road and being able to make sure that we could figure out how to properly stop the cars from blocking the access road. So we often have at the top there, people may want to turn to get onto the access road, but there are cars that are kind of blocking that from them. So that's something else that we may need to, that we'll definitely want to try to address, because just because of the weird angle, you're right, you have a lot of people parking their cars on the street, especially because of the pandemic. You have a lot of older kids with cars that are home now. And how to actually slow folks down so they don't run that stop sign at Wildwood and so definitely looking forward to working with you. And I know a number of residents that are on this block are willing to try some different things to see how they work before we put in some permanent installation.
Well, and we've had pretty good success with that in the past, where we can mock out or mark out possible locations with cones or paint, and then have people live with it for a week or two, and then come back. As particularly in the Wildwood area, we did that with traffic circles, and we did that with a number of things. So we'd be happy to, you know, put some things down, temporary markings, and see if that meets the needs, or see if there's changes that need to be made in the location.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I think Councilman Kostek has a hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a couple of quick questions. I think both of these make a lot of sense. Just kind of more generally, though, I know we had been doing, at one point in time, had been doing measurements and getting data in terms of volume and speed of the cars. Is that still something that we're doing with requests? I think it's just useful in terms of having that baseline and kind of understanding what traffic we have in the city.
It's not currently a requirement in the process, but the police department, through their traffic office, has done that on request, or when we've asked them to track it. We currently, because of the pandemic, any information that we're currently gathering is a little bit non-regular. Right. Like I say, it is important to have that information. We're just not clear about what baseline that might provide. So I don't think in either of these cases, traffic counts or speed counts were done for the 8,000 block of Wildwood or for Darwin. The requests were made basically from the petition process that currently exists in administrative regulations.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's clear in both of these cases that it is needed. So I don't think it's really a question there, but I would like to see us get back to doing that, because I do think there is value in having those measurements and being able to kind of look at that.
I agree. And I think when the council next brings up the smart roadways or safe roadways committee and their recommendations that potentially this could lead to changes in the administrative regulations that would outline additional processes or supplemental processes together with the petition process or eliminate the petition process for traffic calming requests.
Great, thank you. And my other question was, not something that necessarily needs to be addressed right now, but just listening to the residents on Darwin talk about the safety for people walking there, and obviously there are, especially when the schools are open, a number of people walking from the school and to the park and from the park to the school, and people going to the dog park and all of that. I just wondered if residents there had considered, and if there was actually room there to consider adding in a sidewalk in addition to considering some of the traffic calming options there.
I have not heard that or been approached by that. There is room within the right of way for a sidewalk on Darwin Avenue, so that is technically feasible, but I haven't heard the specific request from the resident.
Sorry, it was hard to hear you at the end there, Ms. Braithwaite.
Oh, I'm sorry. There is right of way available within the curb line. It's not a road that we would recommend narrowing by putting the sidewalk in the street, given the two-way traffic and the parking on the street. But there is right of way behind the curb and a fairly flat surface, particularly on one side, if a sidewalk was to be considered. I have not directly heard from residents with an interest in that, but it's certainly something that could be considered.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilman DeBala?
Yes, thanks. My question is also more general. I see the costs listed for the different types of traffic calming that might be finalized for this, and they're certainly reasonable. My question has to do with what was budgeted this year overall for traffic calming, and I'm assuming this is within that overall number, and that's what I want to know.
Yeah, there were limited funds that were put in the budget for either new sidewalk or traffic calming up to $100,000. We also had a carryover of some funding, so I think we have a budget of $168,000 total that could go towards that category of items. So there's certainly sufficient.
Certainly plenty. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
To do these projects.
Great. Terrific. Seeing no other comments or questions on this, they'll come back to us for a vote in the next couple of weeks. Since Ms. Braithwaite is here and a number of items that were on the hold list are things that fall in her department, maybe we'll turn to that work session now, so that way Ms. Braithwaite doesn't have to sit through other things. This is we had a work session on this a couple of weeks ago regarding the budget hold list items that the city manager is requesting that we review and take off the hold list. I know there had been a number of questions during our work session. I don't know if the city manager wants to say a few words before council peppers you with more questions.
Sure, I'll say a little bit. I wanted to provide you some more written information. This week's just not been possible. So I'll just say that this is a very tough time. And then I did get quite a few questions even today. So we weren't able to respond in writing. And I think you deserve to see that information in writing as you're making these kinds of decisions. The things that we talked about at the meeting on February 17th were kind of crystallized into 4 requests of items to take off a much longer hold list. One of the items is to take the recreation position off of the hold list. It's a single position. It was listed as 2 part-time, but we were going back and looking at our records, and we had put the first half of the year and the second half of the year as 2 separate items when it went through the budget, assuming that we were going to be back to work after a half a year, and that's not the case. We do have school starting in just 2 weeks. We're trying to get our staff ready to be able to start offering some before and after care and planning for some camps during the summer. This is a position that we've had before. It was vacant when a person took a position elsewhere. And so we left it vacant for the time that we were in the pandemic. We'd like to bring the position, we'd like to fill the position. It probably would only be for about 2 to 3 months during this fiscal year, and then it would continue on into the next year. The cost for 3 months is about $14,000. And it's a critical position because they do frontline childcare and they oversee part-time staff that also assist with childcare. And they tend to help plan for a lot of the classes as well with the camps. So that's what this position is. The vegetative maintenance supervisor is also a position that's been vacant. We have been not quite surviving well without it being filled. We have spring coming up very quickly, and Ms. Braithwaite is here and can speak to it. The position would only probably be about 3 months because we got to hire a person. That amount's probably in the $17,000, $18,000 range for 3 months, but it would be continuing as a position. that would do vegetation maintenance as well as supervise the staff that does gardens and other vegetative maintenance work. The two big ticket items are infrastructure improvements, $450,000 for road resurfacing. We try to do $500,000 a year of road resurfacing, so this is a little bit less, but $450,000 and $500,000 in ADA sidewalk funds, all of which could be spent this year. $250,000 of that $500,000 is for Flower Avenue. It is for the side of Flower Avenue that's the city side that needs to be ADA compliant. And it would be wonderful to be able to complete it so it really is done and Councilmember Smith can go out and have a great day on completed sidewalks on both sides. There's other work that should be done for ADA improvements, and Piney Branch Road between Ray Road and Philadelphia Avenue is one. There are a number of places that are on state highways that have been identified as key areas that need ADA improvements. There may be some other places we have that ability, but frankly, we could spend this money very quickly just on a couple projects, with Flower Avenue being a big one. I'd very much like to see these items go forward. There's a number of items that I'm not asking to take off the hold list. And those items do save some funds from our existing budget. In looking at our budget, we have about $6.8 million right now in unassigned reserve. I would not recommend any changes or taking things off the hold list if I was uncomfortable about the budget. I do think that these are important for the services that we have to provide, and so that we don't get financially in a hole that's harder for you and the upcoming city manager to deal with. This is something that if you don't keep up with infrastructure, it's bad. It is difficult to catch up on. And so I think we've been so good at this for so long that you don't have a vision about how it could be bad. It's like the fact that we pick up the trash and we do some things the same well all the time. And until it's not there, you don't realize how valuable it is. So I do hope that we can provide you the information that you need to be comfortable with these recommendations. And I do have a list of questions. I know that Councilmember Dabala, Councilmember Kovar, Councilmember Kostick in particular had submitted a number of questions. I know Ms. Braithwaite reviewed a number of the questions and has some answers for a number of them today. So, but I don't have them for you in a written format. So what I would love to hear is if there's some specific questions that we can answer now, or if there's additional questions that we can know so that we can provide that information to you before this comes back to you for a vote.
Great. Councilman Dabala.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate your summary of what the requests are. And I don't want to repeat my list of questions, but some of them you may know the answers to right now, and it would be great to have them in writing so that we can study them and share them with residents. I do have two new questions as you were talking. I just realized I looked at the sidewalk list and the street list, and both, maybe I'm reading it wrong, both of the sidewalk sections you mentioned are not on the list that came through a few weeks ago. I completely understand that we asked you to reprioritize and rethink it. So I'm just suggesting that maybe we could have updates on that and on the road list, because Garland is no longer on the immediate repair list, as I understand it. So that's one new thing. And another new thing related to the money that's still on hold. And with school opening up, that raises the question for me of crossing guards. So
I can answer that question.
Pardon?
I can answer the second
yes,
question.
I would appreciate that you do that. Thank you.
with the crossing guards, most of our crossing guards are back, are able to be back at work and have been vaccinated. We don't know that we're going to have as much work for them to do right away. We're monitoring that, but also police officers can help out and fill that gap. And with summer coming up, it felt like a difficult time to start a new position. We'll be just going ahead and assuming that for the FY22 budget, but not necessarily needing to pull the person off the hold list at this moment.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to say anything right now about position costs for the new fiscal year? Or do you want to provide us that in writing? You said
I can provide it in writing, but it's if for recreation supervisor and vegetation maintenance supervisor, it's simply about 4 times the amount that's listed on the sheet. So 4 times 14,000, 4 times 17,500.
Plus
They're
benefits.
going to, I'm sorry?
Plus benefits. Yes.
That's inclusive.
Including benefits.
That includes the benefits.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Councilman Devala?
I was hoping that we could hear a little bit more tonight about the particular categories of revenue that we're most concerned about. My question about the whole list is one of the future revenue picture for the city. And there are several categories of revenue. A year ago, we had a lot of questions about how they were going to play out. So far, so good. So what are you, as you're preparing the budget, you're looking to next year and even the year after, and you may have some comments on what that looks like, particularly compared to where we were at when we set up the whole list in the first place.
We're at a completely
really
different
thinking
place
about-
right now.
Pardon?
We're at a completely different place than we were a year ago, thank goodness. Fortunately, the property values have stayed fine and gone up a little bit. Income taxes, the stock market has done well. We have not yet seen any decline in income tax. Our monies are a little bit higher than we had projected. It's the thing that we're watching more. But I was fascinated on a COG CAO call today to hear that income tax revenues across the entire region are higher than projected, and there's not an indication that they will be lower. In fact, Montgomery County said they've have the highest amount of income tax revenue that they've ever had. And so the thing that's, of course, sickening is that that's indicative of this division of how things are affecting residents. I think, I'm very cautious when I project income tax revenue. I always underestimate what I really think it might be because I'm very conservative. I think, when it comes to revenue, we're going to be not getting that much for recreation because many people who are going to be getting our recreation services are families that have tight incomes. But generally, I think we're in a pretty good place. We are waiting to see what happens with the federal funds. And I've heard incredibly different numbers for those federal funds. They all sound pretty good to me, but until I see a check, I'm not doing anything. Even without that, I think the revenue is doing well. The questions that you will have before you after having our many budget meetings that we've been having internally is that there are a lot of expenses to meet your council priorities. And so there's going to be some difficult questions about what you want to spend, less and less about issues with the revenue. The question, if assuming we're not going to be raising enormous amounts of tax money and that kind of thing, the question is really how do we spend the limited funds that we have, but they're not, I don't see a revenue decline. We've also been very fortunate to get the reimbursements for our COVID-19 expenditures. And so that's continuing strong. We've not had to dip into other funds, and we have substantial funds remaining to continue to help people with. So I think we're in a pretty good shape. And again, I would not recommend anything if I didn't feel very comfortable with that recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I just want to piggyback on what Councilwoman Dabala mentioned, and I appreciate this. And I also appreciate the report you did on January 13th. Went back to that, and in preparation for next week's vote on the resolution, just wondering if we could have like all in one place, maybe a chart to look at where we did have some savings. For example, on January 13th, it was reported that particularly on personnel cost, it was about $578,000.
Right.
That was a savings. In addition, I believe the CARES reimbursement we received to date is over $400,000, or
right about 440.
Right around 440. But we have a decrease of about $225,000 because of lower interest rates, loss of revenue in other areas. And I know we have that from January 13th. And I think for all of us, having it maybe in one place would be really helpful to just have to look at. And just to reiterate, I have also heard very, very large ranges on what Tacoma Park may get in terms of the rescue package that they're looking at at the federal government level. So we'll have to wait to see what we'll get from that. But thank you very much. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the information to the city manager. Appreciate it. I'm somewhat uneasy about releasing as much from the hold list as is being discussed here, and I'll say why. I think the hold list was, the establishment of the hold list was driven largely, though maybe not exclusively, by the concerns about COVID, and we wanted to have the flexibility. There were other aspects to it also, as the mayor has pointed out in a separate conversation, including that we didn't know exactly how things were going to work out with the collective bargaining agreement, for example, although in some respects, the money that was saved from that and the uncertainty from that was also connected to the pandemic. But in any case, I think the overall driver of it was the pandemic. And obviously the information that was just presented about the income tax prospects is good to hear. I still do have some concerns because one of the other things that we heard, and in particular, this was true about the response in the wake of the last economic crisis 10 years or so ago, more now, was that the impact was felt a couple of years later, not immediately afterwards. Now, this is a different type of crisis in that many, on average, better off people are being able to continue to work. And it's really more the people in service jobs and other less well-paid jobs, and those who do still, unfortunately, have to go out to work and face the pandemic, who are the ones who are probably encountering reductions in their pay. And so there is that equity issue that was mentioned. And I still think that I would like to know more about what is in store for us in terms of the income tax. The reassessments of property values will happen later this year. There's still a big threat of eviction, although we don't know how that will be resolved. There's various moratoria in effect for that, and there's ongoing concerns about food security. So I haven't really heard anything from staff around this discussion to say that the needs for COVID have disappeared. And we just did vote literally an hour ago or less that our top priority for the coming year is responding to COVID. So to me, it feels a little premature to be ready to release the amount of money that we're talking about here. Now, I appreciate that we've gotten some CARES money, and I think that's really helpful, over $400,000. And I think we all agreed, and I don't know if we have to formalize this, but that would be channeled back into our COVID fund. And so I'd be supportive of releasing some funds from from the hold list because we are continuing to get more money through those reimbursements. But again, I don't think the full amount. Now, there's three other things I want to say in terms of the impact on streets. When we talked about this last year, one of the things, and I dug up the email. I know it's a very complicated area. I do think we have to be cognizant of the fact that you don't wait until a street is completely in disrepair, because then it costs a lot more to repair. But what we heard was that, waiting 2 or 3 years can cause a significant drop, maybe less if we wait 1 year. Part of the challenge I think we face right now is that the data that was presented when we discussed this a couple of weeks ago was not as current as we might like in terms of the conditions of the roads. And I don't know whether it's possible, the roads that have been targeted, I don't know if it's possible to get an update on those conditions. So that would be one thing I think could be helpful, because I think those were from 5 years ago. Now, on the 2 positions, I think I would probably be okay with that. It doesn't seem like that's a big cost. But the other thing I want to say is that we may find out as soon as 2 weeks or so from now, or even less, to be honest, how much we're potentially in line for from this federal package. And I admit, the amounts that have been talked about could be very beneficial to us, but as others have said, until we see it, we don't know. But they're targeting March 14th to try to pass it. It's already passed the House. It sounds like the Senate will pass a different version, so there'll still be some ways to go on that, but they've targeted March 14th to try to enact it, because that's the date when the emergency unemployment benefits are scheduled to expire otherwise. And so maybe they'll come close to hitting that, maybe they won't. Congress often misses deadlines. But I think there's a good argument for waiting at least another couple of weeks to find that out, and then we'd have a clearer picture of where we are. So if we were to go forward with this before we know that, I'd favor reducing the amount, and we could talk about by how much. If we can wait until we know that, I'd feel better about that. And I do just want to say, a number of the repairs are in Ward 1, so I'm not just for sidewalks and for streets. I'm not trying to just say something that it would have an impact on the area that I represent too, but I still, at this point, would prefer to have a more surety about what's going on before we release that level of funding. That's where I am.
Councilmember Kovar, I appreciate that. I also know that we will never get full information when we want it. It's simply the nature of when these different funds come in. Right now, we are preparing the proposed budget. We will be next week pretty much making determinations about what numbers go in the proposed budget for this, that show how much we're going to spend this fiscal year, and then what we're proposing for FY22. So we will need to pick numbers and put them in there, and then we may have to do a budget amendment, at some point later. But essentially, we've got to pick the numbers probably by next week. And so I had hoped that I could get this in this week, but I did not have the time. But it is one of these things that I can't wait till March 15th. By that time, I've got to print something in the newsletter. So part of this is just the nature of what do we need to do to respond to some of the immediate needs. It's completely up to the council whether you move forward on these items, but I will need just to have a decision so that I can put this number in the budget or that number in the budget.
Well,
so
that's a fair point, and I appreciate that, and that's something for us to take very seriously. If that's the case, I think it's generally easier, and I don't know what my colleagues would think about it, but I think it's generally easier to have a lower number and then to be able to raise it as opposed to the opposite. So if that's the case, and I understand even after the bill does pass at the federal level, sometimes the amount that's flowing out to cities and towns isn't known for even a month or two later. So I agree, we can't sort of put that in the bank. But if the timing is what you're describing, then I would be of the view that we shouldn't release the full amount from the hold list that's being talked, and I'd be more in the $400,000 to $500,000 level as opposed to the $950,000 to $1 million level.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith and then Searcy.
I would like to associate myself with Councilmember Kovar's comments. I think that there's just a lot of uncertainty, not so much maybe in the revenue projections that the city is going to receive, but I think there's going to be a lot of things we do not know when it comes to trying to make sure our Black and Brown residents get the vaccine, those that want it, if we need to spend some money to push that along. I think it is going to be expensive when it comes to preventing evictions in the city, even though we've heard from the governor and the Biden-Harris administration that they're are going to try to stand up money and to help landlords and tenants. But, you know, there was a recent article, I think it was in the Washington Business Journal, that said that the money that landlords are losing because of what is happening with the pandemic that number has never been seen before. And so, you know, everybody's is trying to figure out, you know, how are people going to be made whole? And if they're not made whole, what's going to happen to these thousands and, you know, hundreds of thousands of people that will be put on the street? And I don't think that we should spend more than the $500,000 that was proposed by my colleague for road repairs and wait to see. I think it'd be prudent to wait to see what the president and the Senate come up with for the latest edition of the CARES Act. But I don't think this is the right time for us to just take everything off the hold list. If this is, you know, primarily for budget purposes, I do agree that we should come up with a smaller number. And if need be, then we can increase funding if we get more money into the coffers of the city. But right now, I think we should hold off because you know, there's still a lot of dark clouds out there. Thank you.
Councilman Searcy.
Thank you so much for this presentation and the opportunity to kind of talk through things. So I kind of think of the budget in a different way. I not only think about the formulation piece, like putting together our next budget and what we need it to look like in FY22, but also execution of the FY21, right? So what is it? So like road work, for example, it has to be done, right? So either we pay for it and execute it this year, or we push it and it's likely to cost us more money. And we do it and we execute it next year, but it's something that has to be done. So part of me also asked the question about, you know, even if we were to not, let's say, hold on, as my colleagues have said, about that extra $400K that we're talking about right now, right? In reality, that means you have $400,000 that we're not going to be able to do anything with this fiscal year, and we're basically pushing it, right? Because we wouldn't be able to, even if there were like, hey, let's put a whole bunch of money towards COVID, we're nearing the end of the fiscal year. We have how many staff in HCD? 3? Like the likelihood of being able to execute over $400,000 in less than 90 days is just bonkers. It's not feasible.
And we actually don't have something to spend it on at this moment. I mean, we are helping people immediately, but it's not to this level of numbers. We have a substantial cushion of funds for emergency use at this time. It's, you know, the question is what happens next year, really.
Yeah. So basically what we're talking about in reality is a carryover, adding to a carryover that would be for the next fiscal year. That's so right. Usually at the end of a budget, there's a lot of stuff that ends up not shaking out and ends up in a carryover pot. I mean, in reality, we funded part of our COVID fund using carryover dollars from programs that we weren't able to spend and things like that. So one question I have is, I know this is maybe a little too soon to call, but, are we going to find ourselves in a situation again where we end up with carryover because programs maybe we weren't able to do, there were some delays with things as a result of COVID? Like, are you anticipating when we kind of get that final wash of everything that there may be some level of funds that may just wash out and then would be ultimately something that we would need to talk about reallocating or carrying over to the next fiscal year? Does that question make sense?
I think so. So we've been very vigorous about identifying things that we can't do and coming to you with a budget amendment to say we're not doing them. So we don't have lots in those categories. The amounts that are here for road resurfacing and sidewalk, if they're okayed right away, we can get them done this year. Otherwise, we can't.
Right.
I mean, so there's I mean, is that right, Ms. Braithwaite? I mean, I think that was what I went back to her and asked, if this is allocated now, can we spend it in FY21? The answer is yes. In 2 weeks, we're starting to push up to not getting the crews on the side. Then you're not going to necessarily be able to mobilize everything in a timely manner. We're not going to have a lot of other activities that have carryover. And we've been going through in meetings with our departments to identify if there's any of those kinds of situations. But we've been pretty vigorous because we wanted to be very open with you the entire time about where we stand with money. And it didn't look like it was not going to go there. We came to you and got it out of the budget amendment.
Yeah. So I think, kind of going back to the mayor's original point of kind of putting that history together to kind of walk people through, because I in my mind, which is why I'm kind of leaning more towards it's okay to kind of do that road work, but I may actually be juggling in a way that maybe my colleagues don't feel comfortable doing, because I'm thinking about the timing of the execution. So the road work has to be done at a time where the weather allows it, which typically happens between in a very funky place when it comes to our budget. In order to execute, get the contract out, get the folks on the road in the time where the weather is nice enough for you to do the resurfacing. Otherwise, you wait until the next fiscal year. So I err more on the side of being okay with approving the road work this time around to get that contract moving. And then when we start talking about FY22, if there is some concern about timing of additional road work, because my expectation and Ms. Braithwaite, please correct me if I'm wrong, is there going to be another set of projects that's in the queue for funding for road work? So we would hit those in the next budget cycle. And then we would have an opportunity if we needed to, and we were concerned about the budget and we were concerned about what was going to happen as a result of pandemic, to do what we did this fiscal year, put it on hold, see how stuff shakes out, revisit it. So that's why my brain is, I'm trying to work with the timing of the execution with the timing of the budget so that we still have that flexibility to have that money available in FY22 if we need some COVID emergency dollars to play around with. We would have them there, but it would still enable us to kind of slow walk our road work forward without having to incur substantial additional cost as a result of continuous delay, if that makes sense. So I can kind of put some of these questions like in an email if it doesn't make sense, but that's kind of how my brain is thinking through it. So I err more on the side of allowing the road work to happen, with the idea being when we have budget conversations about FY22, we might, and I'm warning folks, say put that on hold for right now. enable us to kind of have that money available if we need to during the first couple of quarters of that next fiscal year to see how COVID shakes out. And that would buy us time to see what happens at the federal level, because even if they pass an act, you got to wait for the state to do something, you got to wait for the county to do something. It's going to be a while before we would see a check. So that's how my brain is playing through this thing, so we can kind of serve both masters. But again, definitely willing to put it in the email and some questions if my thinking is off.
Councilmember Siemens and then Costick.
Thank you. Gee, I'm not going to be able to explain my brain quite as well. But this isn't just about road work. And I think last week or the week before said where I stand on the road work. I think that that's important that we do get that done, move ahead this year with that road work. But I also am concerned with, how the economy is going to shake out and how this whole impact of the COVID crisis is going to develop on in the coming months. So I guess the easiest way I can say this is, yes, I agree with releasing the money for the road maintenance. I think that's important right now. But I also want to see us err on the side of conservatism as we look at any additional releases, and for next year with the budget, we still have to be make sure that we have money in reserve as we look forward to whatever comes. Evictions, helping the landlords with the fact that they haven't been receiving rentals. I don't know. I don't know what the situation is or what it's going to be. So that's more scrambled than Ms. Searcy was able to say.
Councilman Costick.
Thank you. I want to associate myself with the comments that Councilmember Searcy and Councilmember Siemens made. I sent a number of questions today and appreciate a couple of the answers now. That was great, and looking forward to some of them next week as well. I think it's really important that we're taking a close look at this, and I think it was very much the right decision to put these funds on hold, and that was a really valuable tool to us over the past year. Looking ahead, as Councilmember Searcy said, we're going to be considering the budget in just a few months. And to me, this work needs to be done. We need to maintain our roads. We need to maintain our sidewalks. We need to make our sidewalks ADA accessible so everyone in our community can use them safely. I think we have an opportunity to reassess when we have a little more information about what it looks like going into fiscal year 22. So to me, that seems like a good opportunity to look a little more in depth. And right now, removing these and kind of doing what we can this year, to me, makes a lot of sense. So looking forward to the further details, but that's sort of where I stand right now.
Great. And I just associate myself with Councilwoman Costick and Searcy's comments. And particularly, I do want to come back to just the staffing as well. I agree on the sidewalk and the road work, but for me, a real priority is particularly the rec staff. And I really think we need to move on that, as it's just, we need that on right now. So I think we need to move that. The vegetation supervisor as well. I think as we've been doing the priorities list, so many residents have reached out to me over the last couple of months talking about wanting to do more on gardening and other things. And if we don't have staff to do the basics, there's no way that we can even start thinking about some of these other programs that we want to explore. I mean, you got to take care of the basics first. And if we're not doing that, we're not going to be able to do the other stuff. So for me, these are two positions that are really important and integral for us to actually meet our other priorities that we have. And under COVID, one of our priorities that we talked about was ensuring childcare. And so for me, this is actually addressing our COVID priority. We are doing this, having the staff and releasing these funds for that for our COVID response. So for me, it's completely hand in hand. It's not one or the other. I would like to get some more clarity on the sidewalks in particular, and whether or not Flower Avenue is included in the list. I think there's some confusion on that tonight, because I think we need to make Flower Avenue whole. I cannot think about moving forward when we're this close, and how much the residents on Flower Avenue have lived through the construction, the inconvenience, and honestly, to now not finish the sidewalk work. So I just want to make sure that's what we are talking about. Because if we're talking about not finishing the sidewalk work on Flower Avenue, I feel even more strongly about moving forward, because I can't even imagine going back to those residents and saying, no, sorry, you're not getting the sidewalks. I just want to.
I can speak a bit to that, and sorry for the confusion. The list of sidewalks is the remaining list of city sidewalks that have not been addressed ADA. So it isn't the list that we were planning for this fiscal year. It's just the remaining undone list, the 20% or less of the remaining sidewalks. So my apologies if providing that added some confusion. As part of this budget year, we assumed that the ADA funding for city sidewalks was going to be put towards the Flower Avenue project. And so that, that again was a kind of a separate assumption on our part. So those two things are not in conflict, though they may have appeared to be. So the list of sidewalks is just kind of a picture of the remaining sidewalks that need to be addressed, and we think that we'll have them finished in 3 to 4 years. You'll see that in the capital budget. But the intention for the funding this year was to address the portion of the Flower Avenue project that was not included in the TAP grant and the other funding that the city received, but was the city portion. One of the challenges with working with the grant funding and state highway is they made it a very complicated process. So we chose to separate out the city side of the sidewalks and the ADA compliance, because if we were to engineer it to meet the state highway standards, it would cost 4 times more and take us 10 years longer. So we just kind of omitted that from the project with the assumption that we would come back with our indefinite quantities contractor and finish it up once the state highway approved contract was completed. So that's been our plan all along. So I don't know. I hope that helps explain that.
Yeah, it might just be helpful before next week just to have the list of if we move forward with the amount that's requested, exactly what will be, or hopefully will be done given the late time we are in the year.
Sure. We were sort of assuming that of that 500,000 in sidewalks, half would be towards the state highway and half would be towards city sidewalks. So that half portion, the 250, would be Flower Avenue related, and the remaining 250 would be for state highway related ADA compliance work, which could continue the portion that we did last year on Carroll Avenue. But we've also identified a problem on Piney Branch Road that we'd like to address sooner rather than later. So those are the 2 projects that we were looking at for that portion of the sidewalk money in this year.
Didn't I hear
and those are areas that we're concerned with, also safe routes to school.
Right, I was going to say, especially the Piney, yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't Maple Avenue mentioned in there somewhere?
Maple Avenue is on the list of city remaining sidewalks for city ADA work. So that again is on that list of outstanding sidewalks that have not yet been addressed in the city's ADA work. So those weren't specific to a fiscal year. Those were just a list of the remaining sidewalks that we need to address to try to give you a sense of how far we've gone since 2004 or 2010 with the project. We have those sidewalks remaining that have yet to be addressed, and we hope to complete them over the next 3 to 4 years.
We're also though working with the complete streets concept for Maple Avenue, which will really address the sidewalks there. That we know Maple needs a lot of work.
Now that we brought that up, there are some tripping hazards on Maple Avenue that I know we cannot maybe get those sidewalks corrected at this time. But I have heard of several seniors who have tripped over that sidewalk and fallen to the ground. Is there any way we could at least paint some yellow stripes on them or something?
We can deal with tripping hazards. Just send us the location.
Okay, I will do that again. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Kovar, did you have another comment?
Just briefly, thank you. So I guess, and I see that maybe I'm in the minority on this, I don't know. And as I said, I was willing to see some of the funds released, but not as much as is being proposed here. I would just make two other observations. I don't want to carry the debate on longer than it needs to. When we put the funds on hold, when we made that decision for the current fiscal year, and we decided that last May, it was with the understanding that if we needed to use these funds for some other purpose, COVID related or whatever it might have been, that if that happened, that we then would not be spending this money. So those of us who voted for it agreed with the notion that maybe we wouldn't spend this money this year, and we were willing to do that. So it's not as if the idea of not spending this money on sidewalks, the various staff positions on streets, was just an inconceivable thing. We said we might not spend it this year. So I want to say that. And the second thing I just want to really encourage my colleagues to think about is, yes, the child care position does connect to COVID. And as I mentioned, I would support going forward with that. But we've said that responding to COVID is our number one priority. And I really haven't heard the staff say tonight, here's why that's no longer a concern. I've heard the staff say, we don't have something right now. And I get that. But if the answer is we're going to spend or agree to expend all this money now, and then in 2 months, because we're voting on the budget in 2 months, we're then going to create another whole list with everything that goes around the budget and the tax rates and so on. That just doesn't seem that realistic to me. So that's where
Well, I guess I would say, Councilman Cover, what I'm hearing staff say is we did some really good planning last year, and we have excellent staff who are in position, who are working with representatives at the county, state level, and even the federal government to make sure that we're putting in place the programs needed for our residents. That's what I've been hearing from staff on all their reports on COVID-19. And so it's not to say that they're not going to come back to us and say we need more money for this or that. But what I'm hearing is, given the capacity that we have on the staff right now, given the money that we've allocated and where we can put money at the moment, it's the money's flowing out. And
but I guess the point is, or the point that I have tried to make is that there's the potential down the road, which was one of the purposes for the whole fund as opposed to the regular COVID fund, was to anticipate if there's a gap in the funding that we get from other levels of government, if there's a gap in the income tax, and maybe there won't be, which would be.
And what staff is saying is income tax for Montgomery County is being reported as the highest level they've ever had. We've gotten over $400,000 back reimbursement for CARES, and we're likely to get maybe even a few $1 million from the federal level. That's their report to us. So, I mean, we could disagree. That's fine. On like what we take off the whole list. I think we will, but I will just say what I'm hearing. I am hearing from staff what they're reporting back to us, and what they're hearing at different levels regarding projections on income, tax revenue, projections on property values in the region. And at the moment, the projections are actually okay looking for us moving forward.
But there is this very significant equity question in that there's a big group of people, and it's not just in Tacoma Park, but it's in Tacoma Park, who aren't, like I am, able to just sit at home and do my job and get my food delivered and all the other things that flow from not being able to do that. And so it's not as if we're even in a position where it'll just, everything gets back to normal. It may, like if I could get vaccinated, maybe I wouldn't even notice anything anymore. But that's not true for a lot of other people. That makes me very nervous. And I don't want to.
And I don't think anyone is disagreeing with you on that. I think we're just disagreeing on and where we need to move now. But I think all of us share that concern. Councilman Searcy?
Yes, I just want to echo that point. Totally agree and share the concern about making sure that residents in our community are able to have access to what they need during this trying time. But I also think it's important for us to remember that we're one spoke in this huge wheel of resources that are being made available to people who are being negatively impacted by COVID. And so what I've heard from staff is that they're working within that network to connect residents to what they need, as well as the city resources that are available. One thing that I do want to make sure is very clear is when I was talking about, the possibility of thinking about holds for FY22, it's from the perspective of we're living in this bubble of uncertainty, right? There's a lot of things that we don't know. And so one resource that we always have available completely in our control, if we need to make some hard and fast decisions about our budget and have resources available, it's a hiring freeze and project spending freeze. Those are some things we can do quite easily as a council. And so, again, not to try to sway folks one way or the other, but I do think it's important for people to realize that we do have tools at our disposal if at any given point in time during FY22, we feel like we need more resources made available in order to direct towards COVID support. So those are some thoughts that I have. But again, no one here wants people to suffer as a result of the pandemic. And I can assure you, I've been on late night calls with some folks and they're working to try to connect people to resources. So I think there's a lot of work that's happening.
Great. All right. Well, we don't have to resolve it tonight because we're not voting tonight. But I think the staff has heard and we'll get some more information and we'll vote on this next week. So
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for that conversation. All right, our next work session, we have our subcommittee on the committees. I'm going to turn it over to Councilman Dabala, Searcy, and Costick to take us through the next episode of our continued conversation on committees.
So
excellent.
Go for it.
Folks on the screen. Perfect. So I will let Councilmember Dabala. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's kind of hard for me to see it. I just wanted to make sure people can see the slide deck.
Yeah. So last time we talked, we laid out for council a timeline and a couple of definitions, what the purpose of committees generally, standing committees, as opposed to any other public engagement, would be, and how we would go about prioritizing the committees that we have and that we may want. So we are going to revisit those tonight with examples so that we can move to some confirm that we have agreement. There wasn't a lot of disagreement last time. So we can confirm that we have agreement on the general purpose of standing committees as opposed to any other kind of committee, task force engagement, and how we go about analyzing the committees, the committee purposes, the purposes of the committees that we do have now, and that we may or may want in the future. So we split this up again. This time, Councilmember Searcy goes first. She'll recap. Councilmember Costick will go over the revised versions of those two areas that I just talked about. I'll show you some case examples of how they play out if we're ready to use them. And then Councilmember seriously will bring us home. So take it away.
Excellent. Councilmember Dabala just went through the quick recap of what we're trying to accomplish in tonight's discussion. Just again to reiterate, we're going to start with a quick reminder of what the council needs to, the actions that the council needs to take in order to have a new committee process in place by our established deadline of June the 30th. We'll talk and hopefully finalize the general purpose and common charge for standing committees, which is something that was discussed 2 meetings ago, as well as finalize the criteria for prioritizing the need for specific standing committees. And as Councilmember Dabala mentioned, we'll also walk through a few case study, a few case examples of the criteria where we're trying to review a few examples of some standing committee purposes that are outlined in the code and how our criteria could be applied to reviewing that committee's purpose. All right, so just as a reminder, we have committees, and currently we have 16 standing committees, boards, and commissions, and there are about 9 that are quasi-judicial. We also have a number of ad hoc task force and committees, and we have over 100 people that are currently serving on council-appointed committees, boards, commissions, and task force. There are 2 things that are really important to keep in mind when we're talking about our committees and what they provide to the city. First, they provide one of our many methods of engaging our diverse community around an issue. And second, committees provide us with an opportunity to leverage the technical expertise as well as the lived experiences of our residents to inform the city's priorities and programs. Also, it's important to keep in mind that our 2020 council priority included improving and formalizing systems for council-appointed committees. All right, so just as a quick recap, I promise we won't go back in time as long as we did during the last presentation, but we did receive a number of recommendations from the council committee subgroup in terms of approaches that we could take to rethink through our committee processes. So the first recommendation was to establish a common structure for all standing committees. And then the second was to clarify leadership roles of council, staff, and committee members. We also received a recommendation to review the purpose of committees, and that's part of what we're going to accomplish today, as well as improve committee operations for members and officers, develop tools to increase diversity on committees, as well as establish a new appointment process. So on the next slide, we're just reminding you all about the approach that we are taking to address some of the recommendations that were brought forth by the work group. So our work will be in 3 phases. Well, I don't want to say phases because there's a lot of overlap, but there's 3 main buckets of work. The first is to clarify the purpose and charge of committees, and we'll continue that work today. That included the purpose and the charge of committees, how many committees or the number of committees we want to have, especially standing committees, as well as committee structure. How big should they be, the number of members, term limits, as well as operational requirements. Do they vote? Do they have recommendations? As well as selection criteria. So what are some of the things we want to keep in mind when we're deciding to select members or participants for our various committees? Another bucket or area in which we want to try to address is how to adopt the necessary code changes and review administrative committee functions. So all of the changes that we ultimately think through in this section, we may need to address that in code, but we also need a number of administrative things that will need to be addressed to just really make sure that our committees run more smoothly. So one piece is making sure that we can work with staff to address the application and administrative processes for our committees, as well as orientation program. We had voted previously on codes of ethics for our committee members. As I just mentioned, code of conduct and reporting mechanisms. Also, equity training is something that we want to try to make available to people who are participating in particularly our standing committees, and as I mentioned before, adopt the necessary code changes. And then another big piece is going to be making sure that we have a new recruitment strategy for our committees, and that includes exploring ways to increase diversity on committees, such as outreach approaches, compensation, as well as incentives. So went through a lot in these three buckets, but the goal is to try to address as much as we can over the next 3 months. So from March through May, we're trying to tackle all of these different components during our council meetings. So you'll see us come back to you time and time again until May so that we can make sure that we have everything in place to go live with our new committees come June 30th. So I'll pause really quick to see if there are any questions about the recap before I turn things over to Councilmember Costick. Excellent. I will move the slide forward and have Councilmember Costick talk through some of the revisions that were made based on our last council meeting.
Thank you. So yes, as Councilmember Searcy said, our focus tonight is on the purpose and the charge of the committees. So these 4 bullet points here are similar to what we talked about at our last meeting, but we have made some slight revisions based on what we heard from all of you at the last council meeting where we discussed this. So this is a revised core charge for standing committees, boards, and commissions. One aspect that we want from them is to provide the council with tangible recommendations in key priority areas or fulfill the city's regulatory functions and requirements. So in other words, we want committees that are doing tangible work that is, beyond sort of just pondering an idea, which is wonderful, but to actually be providing us with some things that we can take action on and are useful to the council in that sense, and or to serve a regulatory function like some of our quasi-judicial committees do. The second item is to leverage residents' technical expertise and lived experiences to inform city policies and programs. We all know that we have a lot of great expertise and experience in our community, and a big part of having committees and commissions and boards is to be able to take advantage of that and utilize that experience to make our city better. Third, to ensure that the council has regular and timely information that we can use when considering its priorities or important issues. And finally, to create an opportunity to engage residents on issues that are important to them, as well as to engage residents to assist in community education and engagement activities in their priority areas. So we made some changes to that last one based on the feedback that we got at the last council meeting, with the idea that the committees are both a way for council to get feedback on things that are important to the council's work, but also to actually utilize committees in a way to identify issues that are important to residents, both issues within committee areas and also issues that might warrant a committee in the future or a task force or some other type of action, because it is something that is important and appealing to residents to participate in on a committee level. So I am going to go on to the next slide. But at the end of our discussion tonight, we'd love to loop back and talk through these items a little more. I think it'll be a little more useful once you've seen some of the case examples that Councilmember Dybala will walk through, and then that might help inform our discussion a little bit. So if you can kind of take notes on anything you've seen so far that you might want to discuss further, that would be great. So now moving from not just kind of the big level purpose of committees down to what are the factors that we are using when we're actually deciding whether or not something should be a committee, whether or not we should have a committee on a certain topic, both in our work right now as we are rethinking committees, but also in the future when there are opportunities where we need to think through whether or not to form a committee or a task force or something else. So we've broken these 6 items into kind of primary and secondary aspects of this. And so under the primary category, we have that the work of this committee supports the council's priorities or a continuing city structural purpose. So we really want them to be doing work that we are prioritizing and find very, very important in terms of a priority. Second, the issue is best addressed by a standing committee. There may be situations where an issue is just really important and we need to be focusing on it, but it maybe does not lend itself well to a standing committee. Maybe it would be better addressed through a task force or a survey or some other form of outreach. And then finally, under primary, it's an ongoing, there's ongoing attention that is needed to the issue. So not something where we need a report produced and then that's kind of the bulk of the work that we might get, like we often get from a task force, but something where there really is ongoing need for some group of people to focus on this. And then in the secondary category, a desire for community engagement on this issue. And this one goes both directions. There is both a desire among the community to engage on this issue, as well as a desire from the council to engage the community on this issue. Second here, relevancy and importance of the issue to residents. And we'll talk a little more about this as we get into some of the case examples, but there may be situations where an issue itself is important and relevant, and that may be different than whether or not there is relevancy and excitement among residents to participate in a committee focused on that issue. And then finally, logistically, that there is staff capacity to support a committee. So I'm going to turn it over now to Councilmember Dabala to kind of walk through how these things might look as applied to specific existing committees right now.
So we picked 4 that I think if we all just sort of stopped for a moment and said, what do we really need? Board of Elections would come to everybody's mind right now, as of course we need this. So this is 2 things. This is case examples. These are not like final recommendations or something. This is just to show you how what we've laid out would play out with a couple of groups that we're familiar with, starting with this one. And also, this is not in any way an evaluation of the work that a particular group is doing right now. It's about the purpose of that standing committee. What is the reason we have it? What is the use writ large that we see for it as a council? And while I'm on the work that people do, I would like to very much thank the Board of Elections once again, and the other 3 groups that we'll be talking about tonight, because regardless of what we say about their purpose or how they stack up against the 6 criteria we laid out, the 6 factors we laid out, the fact is that residents have been working very hard to produce useful products for the city and the council and for the residents of our community. So with that said, Board of Elections, in the code, there's 7 or 8 things that are laid out that the Board of Elections is responsible for, what their purpose is in terms of special running elections, encouraging voter registration, keeping track of the city election laws and how they might need to change, serving as election judges, and that's a lot of different, very practical things. So next slide. Clearly, then they would check that first box. Next slide, please. Of primary, sorry, I meant the primary secondary slide. So we had laid out those six factors, and the first one was, does it meet a structural purpose? Does it produce? Does it work on an issue of a continuing priority? Clearly, this checks the box. Is there any way that there we go. Thank you. Is the issue best addressed by a standing committee? Is it something that's ongoing that needs regular attention by the same group of people? Clearly. Second set of categories, not so mandatory. Is there a desire for community engagement around this issue? Yes, of course. Is this relevant and important to our residents? Yes. Staff capacity to support this committee, yes. So this one checks all the boxes, but it shows you kind of how we're thinking about this. Next slide, please. So we also picked out the Commission on Landlord Tenant Affairs. In the code, they are charged with 4 things, not just adjudicating complaints, but also some other broader aspects of tenant law. Next slide, please. So again, we felt that they they serve all the factors that we laid out for what we would prioritize as a committee, a standing committee that we really need. Their work supports a council priority housing. It serves a continuing structural purpose. Somebody has to hear appeals. The issue is best addressed by a standing committee, not an ad hoc group that comes and goes. And ongoing attention, yes, of course. The secondary factors, do we as a council think that community engagement on this issue is important? Yes. Do we see that residents think this is relevant and important? Yes. And do we have the staff capacity, both hours in the day and technical expertise to support this committee? Yes. Next example. And you'll notice these are all what we have been calling quasi-judicial or regulatory committees. So it'll get a little trickier talking about the importance of a particular purpose and how it fits with the priorities we have when we don't have that regulatory hook. But here on the Ethics Commission, they are charged not only with the written advisory opinions and the investigations of any alleged problems, but with a bunch of other things in terms of public information and certifying to the state that we comply with ethics laws in this city. So next slide, please. So as we were thinking about these 6 factors, the 3 primary ones, does this work support a priority of the council and serve a structural purpose, a regulatory function? Yes. Is this issue best addressed by a standing committee that meets regularly? Yes, that's what we think. Is this an issue that deserves ongoing attention as opposed to a quick in and out task force? We think yes. Again, on the secondary factors, is this an issue where the council desires community engagement on this issue? Yes. Is this an issue that residents think is relevant to their lives and is important to them? We actually split a little on this one. But 2 out of 3, we checked yes. The subtlety is this question of, yes, some residents clearly care deeply about ethics. Is this front and center in everybody's minds? We have a lot of different types of people living here. So as we apply these factors, it becomes important to think not just about one segment of our residents that we hear from a lot, but all of our different residents and what is important and relevant to their lives. Is there staff capacity to support this committee? Yes. I was going to say something about the city attorney, but yes. So that's how it plays out here in our last example. We all remember the tree commission. We talked a lot about what their responsibilities were last summer when we revised the tree ordinance. Again, in the code, not just hearing appeals, which is a regulatory function, but in the code, it assigns them with a number of other broader concerns for the urban forest of Tacoma Park. Next slide, please. So again, thinking about the factors that we've outlined. So they have both a structural function and they work on a council priority. The issue is best addressed by a standing committee, people who are around long enough to learn the issues and keep working on them. Ongoing attention, there's always tree permits, there's always going to be tree appeals. Desire for community engagement on this issue. Again, on this one, we went back and forth a little just to show you how the factor might be applied. We didn't talk about this aspect of it when we just assumed that there's always been a tree commission. So of course we were going to continue it. But one could ask the question, just because we've always had an independent resident body reviewing city technical decisions, do we want to continue that? So in this case, we said yes, but it shows how that factor might play out with another committee that was set up originally for a purpose of having, of the council desiring an independent community engagement on an issue, but which may have outlived its usefulness. So that's something to think about. Is it relevant and important to the residents of the city? Yeah, a lot of people care about trees. Does the staff, is there staff, there's an urban forest manager to support this particular function who has the technical expertise to support the group. So that's 4 examples, easy ones, mind you, of how the overall purposes that we've outlined and the 6 factors for what's a priority committee, standing committee, play out, and gives you a sense of how we would then want to proceed with the rest of the 16 and come back to you then with some recommendations based on the factors that we've laid out and the purposes that we've agreed to. And with that, I will stop and just do a quick check-in. Questions about the examples before we throw it back to Councilmember Searcy. I can't see hands, so someone else will have to let me know.
No hands up.
Okay, let's keep rolling. Thank you.
Okay, so I know that we're supposed to go to next steps, and we can do that, or we could also pause and kind of go back to the purpose and the criteria, just to make sure that folks don't have any feedback or additional questions, thoughts, or concerns, because ultimately one of the first things that we would like to do is finalize these babies. So let's go back. Perfect. So we're just going to go back really quickly to, the revised core charge for the standing committees, and just to see if folks had any additional questions, thoughts, or concerns, particularly as it relates to some of the new language that was added based on your feedback during the last meeting.
And I think that the mayor had mentioned she had a point, but is there anybody else? Again, I can't see.
No hands there. I see no hands. And I didn't have a point on this one. I had it on the next chart. I see no hands here. So I think that means you all are good to go on.
Yes, I take silence as agreement. Moving on. All right.
Before you get to that, I would like to say that one of the things, just remind you all that one of the things in the chart, the recommendations from the group last June, and also incorporated into that month-by-month chart, the question of not only the purposes of committees, but the number of committees that we have now to try to keep track of. And that's one of the reasons that we're talking about this.
Councilmember DiBala, this is Susie Ludlow. Just one thing that occurs to me is that I think every committee originally had a purpose set by council.
Yes.
And so part of the hard part will be sometimes you might say, gee, it's not as important anymore, or it's not enough to justify a full standing committee. So just, I guess I want to give you some kudos for taking that challenge on about trying to make a decision. It might check a box, but it may be one that that you as a council feel differently about. And so just, I'm sure you've been talking about how to go through that, but I think that's one of the harder discussions, because you kind of hate to say, these people have been working on something that we don't think is important as the councils used to think. That's awfully a tough one. And so just kind of what your criteria are for that may be helpful, and it may really go to current council priorities or something like that.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's does the work support council priorities? Is it still a relevant issue? Is there still a desire for community input? That's exactly where we're going with this. Thank you.
If I could just jump in really quickly, I
Yeah.
think we also envision that there might be cases where the work that people are doing maybe is important, but could be wrapped into some other committee as well. Maybe it doesn't have to be a committee that's exactly formulated as it is now too, or maybe it could be a task force or some other type of thing.
Right. For example, we talked a lot about the public safety task force and why is that a short-term task force and not a standing committee? Well, we had that discussion when we set up the public safety task force, and it is different from the police advisory board. And that gives a sense of, is this an ongoing issue that needs attention, or is this we need your advice right now on these specific questions, and then we're done. So again, another way of thinking about it. But I think we didn't, sorry, Councilmember Searcy, we didn't let you check in on these before we started discussing them.
Oh, no, that's perfectly fine. I think one of the things that's important to also keep in mind, although the tool, and we talked a bit about this, is developed to try to help us with kind of looking at purposes retrospectively. The idea is that, once we have this criteria that's clearly established, then it will also help us when we're determining whether or not to establish a new standing committee. Like, what is the most appropriate when we have a new issue or a new hot topic that we want to bring residents together to help us with thinking through. This criteria will help us with, or future councils to be able to say, okay, let's ask ourselves these 6, 7, whatever we agree upon, like questions about the purpose of this group, and then ask ourselves whether or not it should be a standing committee or something that's a task force, a kind of one and done kind of thing. So we envision this kind of serving multiple purposes. And, Susie, to your point, hopefully if we kind of set it up and the criteria is clear enough, then over time, it'll enable us to more easily kind of purge things as they no longer meet the spirit of the council priority, because we may be thinking ahead of time that, yes, this is a long-standing issue versus, no, this is not a long-standing issue. So right now, I'm showing the criteria because it sounds like everyone is in agreement on the purpose. So were there any thoughts, questions, concerns about the criteria elements?
I had some thoughts. I don't see any other hands, so I'll jump in. First of all, I just want to say this is awesome. Thank you so much. I love having criteria in which to, as you say, go back and look at the committees we have now, but also to help us and future councils really decide this. And I really, wish we had something like this in place before. I remember, I think it was like one of the very first weeks I joined the council, we were deciding on the commemoration committee, I think it's called, the commission. And it was really hard, honestly, in that conversation to evaluate and have just sort of a good criteria. So one, thank you so much. I think this is awesome. And I have some suggestions as you're thinking through it. One is, I like when we say issue is best addressed by a standing committee. It seems from when you were walking through the case studies, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that what's assumed in that question is is it best addressed by a standing committee or a task force? And I'm wondering if we should change that, or if it should be more explicit about, is there a way to accomplish whatever we see as the goals for this that we want through a means other than a committee? And that's not well said, but what I mean by that is really having a conversation of, is it a standing committee? Is it, as we'll talk about in a couple of weeks when we talk about redistricting, possibly having a consultant for something, or somebody outside the city help us with something. When we did the housing work, one of the things we did do is have, decide to hire folks to help us think about housing needs in the city. So I think there's sometimes when we're looking at a council priority or an issue and we're thinking about what's the best way to move the work forward. So that may be in there, but I just kind of thinking that through is like, how do we best accomplish the goals, and is a standing committee the best way to do that? I think as we went through these here, one of the questions I have, and this isn't to say I want to get rid of COLTA, but one of the questions I do have is the county that also has, a form of COLTA, their own form of COLTA. And, we have had conversations over the past couple of months of, is it confusing? Like, are we using the same standards for things? And so that's just a question, and thinking about, do we need to have it here versus is there, maybe a county committee or something that takes care of that? And I have no idea on COLTA. So that's not, I just use that as an example. And then the other thing, and I love this, and this isn't necessarily something I would change. I might just personally bump up though staff capacity to support the committee. Because I feel like that goes really hand in hand with the point I just made, which is this the best way to actually accomplish our goals? Because for me, if we don't, I think we have seen, or I believe that when we have committees that we don't have the staff capacity to support them, it creates frustration on all around, from the residents who are part of the committees to council members to staff. And, it just, things normally just don't go well when that happens. So I might lift up the staff capacity to almost a primary. And on, this is just another thing, I'm packaging things a little bit on desire for community engagement on an issue. I've just been thinking a lot about, like, we use the terms engagement a lot. And, I think sometimes we use it as this catch-all for things that really are on a spectrum, all the way from thinking about, getting community input to partnering and collaborating with members of the community. And different projects, different issues, like, will go along that spectrum, from needing input to collaboration. And so this looks great. I'm not saying we have to change it, but we may just want to think about, when we say desire for community engagement on an issue, what is that? What are we actually talking about when we're thinking about a committee? And what kind of community engagement actually is that? Because if we're truly on the end of the spectrum where we're thinking of committees as collaboration with members of the public and council, then that speaks to a certain type of committee, versus are we looking for something that is on the other end of the spectrum, which is providing input? So anyway, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I really appreciate you putting it all like this, because it really helped kind of gel some things I had been thinking about for a while. So this is great, and those are just some thoughts to consider. I don't see any other hands up. Councilmember Siemens, are you talking? Because you're on mute. I don't know if he's done. I don't see any other hands up at this time. So I think I'm the only, nope, I don't see, Councilmember Siemens is shaking his head. No, I don't see any other comments.
Awesome. I love silence during meetings because that means I can keep on talking and take everything as a yes. So I do, for one quick second, want to, because, you know, Mayor, you brought out a lot, kind of dropped the mic on a lot of stuff. And I kind of want to unpack some of it a little bit just so that I'm clear on, you know, some of that feedback, because I think it was really good. So one point that you brought up was, you know, is the issue best addressed by a standing committee? And I think we talked about this point as well, and we can definitely clarify this language. But and Councilmember Costick and DeBala definitely correct me if I'm wrong. But we were thinking about it from the perspective of, do we need a committee to do this? And so we can make that language clearer. But that was kind of like the thought process about that particular question. Like, for example, if you take the Board of Elections, yes, you know, a committee, an objective group that is not going to be politically tied to the outcome of an election, potentially resident driven, is a really good way for us to make sure we're meeting, you know, the goals of having a fair and open election process. So yes, we could clarify that language to make that point clearer. But you did mention a second criteria, which I also think is a good one, about could someone else do this, or should someone else do this, which we could either tap into that point as a sub consideration for, is this issue best addressed by a committee? And a sub question could be, you know, should someone else be responsible for this? A contractor, the county, some other group? Or do you think we should consider that as a separate level criteria? So even if we do have a committee, when we're thinking about the actual purpose and functions, should those functions should we consider whether or not someone else does that? Does that make sense? So we may say yes. A committee might be good, but like COLTA, for example, they do things in addition to adjudication.
Right.
But we may say, you know what, we think for those other purposes, it makes sense for us to have a committee. But when it comes to the adjudication process, maybe we shouldn't have COLTA doing that. Maybe we allow the county to do that. And we really just have this committee to help keep the pulse on what's happening in terms of landlord-tenant relations. I mean, that's a possibility. So my question is someone else responsible a question that needs to tie to whether or not we should have a committee at all? Or is it something we should think about when we're thinking about the actual role and responsibilities that a committee plays? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it could be the latter. Because I think if we are considering it and consider, like, is the committee the best to address this, and have in mind like all the other ways that it could be addressed, if that's affirmative, then I feel like it's like, right, it's this like flow chart kind of thing, right? Like, if yes, then go here. So if we answer yes, committee, then you go to, okay, do we need other things for the committee to then do its work? And that's where, some of the other things we talked about come in. But it might be that, like, you know, when we're starting to think about something, we're like, oh, well, instead of having a committee, maybe this is actually better addressed by, you know, having a consultant or doing it another way.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And you're kind of leading down this path of prioritization, which is also something we were talking about, and which led to the whole primary versus secondary. So I think it's good for us to think about, we can definitely move the staff capacity over to the primary. But I do think that maybe there's some logic to kind of following certain questions in terms of the priority questions in order. So first and foremost, like, is this work something that supports a council priority of some sort of purpose? And then if yes, do we need to have a committee? if yes, then do we have the staff to support? Do we need to have a committee or a task force or someone to do it? And then maybe there's some sub questions there. And then if yes, do we have the staff capacities to support the committee? We're just trying to think through, like, as we're going through and actually starting to check various boxes and think through the strategy for reviewing the purposes of some of our current committees. It's helpful to kind of think through, because we gave you all the very easy vanilla version of going through the purposes of a number of these standing committees, but it gets real messy real quick when we start getting into some of the other groups.
Yep. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I just wanted to add that I think issue is best addressed by a standing committee seems like a really, like, you could just check that off. But I think, as you said, Mayor, like it actually could take you down a really long tunnel of deciding what is the best community outreach.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, this has been really helpful. I don't know if there's any other questions or thoughts.
I have
Councilmember, let's see, Councilmember Kovar and then Councilman Dabala.
Well, my point has to do with what we were just talking about on the staff capacity. The reason that it was in the secondary category is because, to some degree, if it's a high priority, of course, there will be staff capacity. So you wouldn't want to go through all the others and say, yes, this is meets all these other factors, but we don't have a staff person. We can't have a staff person to do it. So that's just something to think about, not to belabor the point. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, but one thing I will say, Councilmember Dabala, and we've talked about this a little bit, not having staff capacity, but it still being an important issue where we're checking all these boxes, might simply mean we need to allocate money towards the establishment of this particular committee, where we may do a contract, a la Public Safety Task Force, where you're bringing in some contractor to help with the facilitation, at least initially, depending on what type of committee is ultimately established, if it's a standing versus a task force versus like. So I'm kind of, it creates a different discussion, but if we don't have, when we're reviewing or we're setting up new approaches, if we don't have staff capacity, that's something important to talk about, because that means there may be some budget implications.
Mm-hmm. Right. Councilmember Kovar.
Just one quick comment, thanks. And if this was already covered in some of what the mayor said, I apologize because my sound was in and out for a bit, but on number 2 of the primary criteria, issue is best addressed by a standing committee. When you move away from the quasi-judicial ones into the ones that are more sort of issue-oriented, policy-oriented committees, I don't know that the question would be if the issue is best addressed, because it may be best addressed for the council just to vote on whatever it is, but the point is, can they make a really valuable contribution that we wouldn't otherwise get? So it just, somehow that word best just bothered me a little bit, because I can imagine how they can make really valuable contributions without necessarily literally being the best. And I realize if you don't use a word like that, then people might say, well, then why should we have it if it's not essential? But that struck me as maybe overly high a barrier for the policy-oriented committees to meet. So just, I tossed that out there. I don't know whether that came up or not in the discussion.
Cool. So you all can ponder that as well. I don't know whose computer we're using, but we can see something that may be private information. So I don't know if somebody's trying to access something. Just
sorry, it's late. That means my computer is updating.
Oh, okay. I was like some login or something. I'm like, just FYI.
Don't enter your PIN right now. Whatever.
So one last thing that we want to make sure that we can kind of walk folks through. So based on today's conversation, It sounds like we are free to finalize the generic purpose. It sounds like we have some agreed upon. Oh no. Did I lose everyone?
No, we're here.
Okay. Can you still see my screen?
No, but we can hear you.
Okay, my Zoom is rebooting. So you might see me in a minute.
Okay.
So we will take your feedback in terms of the agreed upon factors for the criteria. And then what we still would like to do is come back to you all with the finalized criteria based on the discussion today, and still move forward with actually taking a look at initial review of the committees, because I think the devil will be in the details as we come to you all with some of the recommendations in terms of the criteria, applying the criteria, and getting your feedback in terms of how we think through the specific committees. And that is the last, while my Zoom is still spinning. So that is the basically the last piece. Again, we still are going to, in March, finish up conversations around the committee purpose, charge, and structure. And then we'll also, come May, start talking about some of the code changes and administrative functions. And then also, I'm sorry, that was in April, but in May, we'll talk about the recruitment and diversity strategy, as well as hopefully new member appointments in June. And I apologize. I think my Zoom is now completely shut down. And I will reboot it, but that is why I use my phone, so I'm still here.
Okay. Great. I'm seeing no other hands or anything. I think we're making a lot of progress on this. And I just really want to thank Councilman Dabala, Costick, and Searcy for the great work on this and moving this forward. This is a lot. And so really appreciate the structure and the presentation. So look forward to more. So great. The last item on our list tonight is just an update on the city manager search. We have the survey is still available for folks. Last time I checked yesterday, we had over 300 people who had responded. And we have the questionnaire is available in English, Spanish, French, and Amharic. We can break down ward, and not to shame anyone, but Councilmember Siemens, we could hear more from Ward 4, honestly. So if we need to also help with assistance, if you think it would be helpful to have, print out some or do things like that, we can connect and talk about that. But we could use some more in Ward 4. Anyway, that will stay open for a bit. We are the Catherine Tucker Parish, who we hired to help us through this process, held a stakeholder discussion group this evening. Thank you to Councilman Costick and Kovar for helping pull that together, the logistics of it. The second one will be tomorrow night. And I believe the official job announcement, we've been talking about it for a while now, so I think people know about it, but the official job announcement will go out later this week. So I think we're moving along on this, and we'll continue to provide updates to folks. And the schedule, we're hoping, I believe the application process will be open until early April. And then we will start scheduling interview time in May. And I sent the dates to the council members to get that on your calendars to make sure. And if you know of any conflicts, please reach out as soon as you can. During COVID, it's a little harder to logistically to do all these things and schedule folks. So we want to make sure that particularly time for final interviews where candidates, we probably will be in person, that you are available. Councilman Dabala.
So one question on this and one question I forgot earlier. So the materials to post the advertisement, maybe I missed it. To post post the position, maybe you said this, and if so, could you please say it again, because I missed it, are gonna be posted this week, next week?
This week. It should be this week, yeah.
Right, plus the 2 stakeholder groups. So we are
Mhm.
definitely making progress. I had, I meant to mention earlier, I'm sorry to bring this up now, speaking of another group that we talked about, the Public Safety Task Force, just asking if the materials for who was appointed and their background can be posted sometime soon.
We're working on that. We have received 7 of the 15 members, their biographies and background information. And so we're pulling that together. So should be soon. Cool. Any other questions or anything? No? All right. Seeing none, we're done. I hope that somebody is really keeping track of how many meetings that we're ending before 11 o'clock since the first of the year. But thank you all for your help on this, and more to come next week. Stormwater next week, the hold list we will return to, and lots of other good things. So see you next week on March 10th. Thank you all.